Thank you so much for joining us, and sort of a belated congratulations on getting the Changemaker Award at TIFF.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Give it up. So I read that the film's idea first formed in the wake of your father's death when you returned back to your family home in Chicago. How did that first thought blossom into picking the Cabrini Green area out of all the neighborhoods in Chicago?
I'll try to give the long story short. Cabrini Green, I didn't grow up there. I'm not from this community. It was always a place that I knew about as, a place to not visit, and a place that was very dangerous, and kind of all of the things that are sort of, you can read or watch about Cabrini Green from that time. That would be the image that you get. When I moved back home in 2013, when my father had passed away, the last of the towers had been demolished. And I was interested in exploring this concept of home and what it meant to me. Now that my father was gone, the house that we had grown up in was sort of up for debate about like what we would do with it. And I just, over the years, I'd come off of making a film that was very autobiographical and very much about my family, and I wanted to explore it from a different perspective through the eyes of two kids in a community that had this really special relationship with this place that no longer existed, and that relationship continued long after the towers had been demolished. So I got in touch with a former resident, I think it was around 2018 that I started to go back to Chicago between work while I was here, and I would do interviews with former residents, and then the story sort of emerged from there.
So you talked about your research in interviewing these former residents, and is it through that the idea of, or the focus on childhood and sort of the slice of life aspect came about?
Yeah, there were so many stories that people shared from their childhood that I just found fascinating, and were just moments and these slices of life that I just hadn't seen before, and I really wanted to share that. I also wanted to depict this place, as some place that we could have our own relationship to while watching the movie and understand why it meant so much to these people. And I felt like a child's perspective was very unique because this was the only place they ever knew as home, and the way they looked at it was just so different from adults. They don't have the full picture of what's going on from this macro level, in the neighborhood and the community. They certainly had a sense of it, and definitely kids in Cabrini Green grew up really fast. But it was the fact that they still had a sense of wonder, and that kind of allowed you into sort of understanding what was so special. Because I think from the outset, it was very easy to say that this was just a place that should be demolished because it was a community, a neighborhood that was really struck by, crime and the drug trade. And I think it's in the things I was reading, it was like, this is the dominant cultural narrative about this place, and how can I, work my way through this story in a way that allows you to see this other side of it. And that's sort of, how we landed on the perspective of the kids.
And how did this process of a journalistic approach differ from your past work?
Well, I think it's good to go into the process admitting that I didn't know very much. But I was also not going into it with any, I was not going into the process trying to impose a story onto the people I was interviewing and only picking the details that served that story. I was really just listening for much of it. So it was like not a lot of writing at first. It was just talking to people and doing deep background. And then over the years, it started to take more of a shape that it's going to be set in '92. Dan Trell's death is going to be sort of one of the pieces of the story. It's going to be told from the perspective of kids, and ultimately it's going to be about this family, these families, and these two kids and their friendship. So it took quite a while before that emerged. I think it was more, I'm trying to find my way into it, and I just was drawn to the stories that sort of presented Cabrini Green and the relationship that these people had to Cabrini Green in a different way than I had seen before.
And were there any specific anecdotes from the residents that you interviewed that made its way to the film that you can share?
There's one story that Dan Charles' mother, Annette Freeman, who's a consultant on the film as well, she shared about how when she was in school, she was always ditching, and the popular spots included the beach and downtown. So I just really loved that idea of the kids going downtown and escaping the neighborhood for a bit. There was a lot of hooky stories. There's a long tradition of hooky in Chicago, like in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Cooley High. Like, it feels like a cinematic Chicago tradition to ditch school. So I felt like we needed to have that sequence in the movie.
Was that also from personal experience, maybe, or?
No, I would never do such a thing. I'm too much of a goody two-shoes.
Gotcha. So let's talk about the casting process of the two boys. Blake Cameron James and Gia Knight Ramirez have such a natural presence, and they seem like really good friends already. How did you find them, and was there any rehearsals or workshops?
The casting process took a year and a half, and it was mostly done over Zoom. So we saw hundreds of kids, and I saw pretty much every child. It felt like every child between the ages of like 8 and 11, or 8 and 12. And it was a long process because we couldn't do it in person because of COVID restrictions. But we were really looking for kids who had like a lot of, who were more extroverted, I think, because we couldn't really just lean on them being silent protagonists. They carry a lot of the scenes in the movie. They have dialogue. And Blake is from Alabama, so he just had like a charisma about him that felt right for Malik. And then Gian is actually from Chicago, and he just felt like he was already a part of like the fabric of the movie the moment I watched his tape. So once we saw that both of them, we did chemistry reads over Zoom, and then I flew out to Chicago. We did a chemistry read in person. We sent those tapes to the studio, and the studio approved them. And then once that happened, we were able to go into production. The rehearsal process was quite extensive. I didn't have them read the whole script. I had them read it in pieces. So we never gave them the full script right away, because I wanted them to be able to really experience it as it was going on. Like, their relationship was deepening as we were rehearsing, and they were getting to be closer friends. But one of the things that was really important was understanding I'm working with children, and even the process, even the experience of being in this movie was going to be a formative one for them because they're children. So I think it was key that they're able to leave their characters at work and be able to be children at home. So we did this process where they would put on the coat of the character at the beginning of the scene, and at the end of the scene they would take it off. I didn't want to mind their own experiences to motivate emotion on screen, which seems a little bit counterintuitive because a lot of times in casting you try to find children who are exactly the characters, and they are close to their characters, but they're not exactly like their characters. It was, reminding them that they are, Blake, but now you're Malik, and this is what Malik would do. And then I think that actually made it possible for them to really understand their characters better, because they were always thinking about, why is Malik doing this or saying this, instead of like, I wouldn't do that. So they took a lot of ownership over their characters by the end of the process. We went through all of the scenes, rehearsed every single scene at least once, and then we just did it. We just went through production. It was really, they're incredible to work with. They're very incredibly talented, also incredibly emotionally mature. They were 10 and 11 when we started filming.
Yeah, they were absolutely magnificent on screen. Were they aware of the history of Cabrini Green and Dentrell Davis?
They knew everything. I mean, they came in, it seemed like they read every Wikipedia article about it before we started rehearsing. Like, I would say, we were reading the scene in the cafeteria, and then, one of them said, like, this is the moment that the shooting happened, and then shortly thereafter, the CHA like ordered raids, and then I was like, you already know this whole movie, like you already know what's going to happen. They had a really deep understanding of the history of the place, and then they also got to meet Annette, who came to set as well and understood what happened to Detrell and how much of an impact it had on the community. They were very knowledgeable.
You kind of touched on a little bit about, dropping the on-screen character when they leave, but can you talk about specifically how you work with them on these heavier subjects and making them understandable for kids? Because I think on screen, also in the film, it's also understandable for kids, even though you're not shying away from these heavier issues like classism and police brutality.
I think one of the scenes where we had to be careful with just making sure they were prepared was the scene with the raid. Even though we had prepared, they had read the scene in rehearsal, that one was difficult to rehearse because there's just a lot going on with the cops that are coming in and turning the apartment upside down. And we needed to make sure they were emotionally ready for it, because it is actually terrifying when they knew what was going to happen, but not to the extent that it would, and we had to do it several times to make sure we recovered it. So we had to prep them a little bit about what the cops would be doing, why they're doing it, sort of giving them the context, and just making sure that they know that this isn't happening to them personally. They're able to leave it at the end of the day. That was a hard day, I think, for the kids, because it was a little terrifying. There was so much that was going on, and they were more passive in that situation where they didn't get to assert themselves. And I think that one required a lot of preparation ahead of time, and then also sort of making sure they were okay afterward.
Do you think their own perspectives also affected the way you portrayed those events on screen and making it understandable for a younger viewer as well?
They had a lot of thoughts as we would talk about the scenes on how challenging it would be, especially in the position of Malik, to have come from a family where you have the means to leave and to be departing, and that this rift is happening with the friend who stays. And I think they talked a lot about that because they do come from different backgrounds, and that was something that came up a lot of their perspective on that, of how difficult that would be, and even in their own lives, like how they would feel in that situation. I think that what I realized, which I was hoping is true, and in my experience has been true, is that the painful rift in like childhood friendship is as painful as an adult friendship. And I wanted to, in the process of making the movie, make sure that we give dignity to their emotions and their feelings, because just because they're children doesn't mean that it doesn't matter. And I think they really shared their own experiences with me, and that really helped shape some of those scenes, especially when they say goodbye to each other.
And I think we both grew up in the 90s. Did you, when creating the aesthetics and I guess nostalgia in a way of the 90s, did you kind of look back at your own history for that?
I think the biggest one was there was no way to like write the script without referencing the Bulls in some way. Like, I feel like I actually shared the script at an earlier stage, and then one of the readers said, like, "Where's the Bulls?" And I thought that was very apt, because I grew up around that, and I grew up around watching everything stopping in a household to watch a Bulls game. I remember my father taking me to one, and how meaningful that was, and how much that had an impact at the time, that this is the subject of conversation, like all constantly, and they have strong opinions about it. So that was something that actually was hard to write, because I was thinking about what do each of them think, like specifically about what's going on. And I think that was one part of it that I felt like was very much inspired by my own childhood, was like how deep the knowledge was of this team and all of the like interpersonal relationships. And rewatching Last Dance was like reliving part of the 90s or something with my, family and it was like the reality TV of the time. So that ended up in the film in a little way. I didn't want it to be too much.
Totally. I think we're going to open it up for audience questions. Please raise your hand. Yes.
Yeah, do you have any specific way you conduct a set, or you direct the actors to bring out those incredible performances in the kids?
The question is about on-set directing.
I was very intimidated before working with children. I did a lot of exercises with them and got to know them really well. I think the most important thing is, at least in my relationship with them, was that it's not important to be cool. There's no way I can be cool to them. But I think the most important is that they trust me, that they can come to me and talk to me. So there were some days where, they just were having an off day, and they had to be able to share that privately. They also get very embarrassed of not performing to my expectations. So it was also making sure that they felt reassured, even when it wasn't what I wanted, to make sure that they know that it's okay and that we can try again, and that sometimes I also just had to understand when it was enough. Sometimes they don't have anything more to give in a scene, and it was I have to change how I'm doing the scene to accommodate that. But they're incredible kids, and so I think the biggest is making sure that they understand that I'm, trustworthy, and that they can confide in me, because, on a big set, there's a lot of people, and they feel like they're performing for those people, and that they can feel every little bit of disappointment when something isn't going to plan. And I think just they need a lot of reassurance. One of them is, he was very self-confident and didn't need very much. It was a little mini Denzel Washington. He could do it in one take. He called himself One Take Blake. He signed his card to me that way. And then Gian was somebody who just needed a little bit more reassurance, and the way I worked with him was very different. He needed to have more space before a sequence to get in the mind of the character. He needed more time afterwards, and he also needed really specific direction. I think as long as it was specific and they could put it in the context of what they knew about the scene, they were able to do it. But there are some days where they were just tired. They stayed up playing video games. They did a lot of stuff kids do, so I had to be able to deal with that too, because they are kids, and I think that sometimes people forget that they are working on set and they're actors, but they're children and they have lives outside of the set. So I try to express interest in what they're interested in. We talked a lot about anime and basketball and stuff. They thought, again, I was never cool to them, but I felt like I wanted to express interest in what they care about and show that I'm interested in them as people. So that helped a lot. That's more about dealing with kids in general. But I think with working with child actors, it's important that they feel like they can trust the director.
Any other question? You can raise your hand. Yes.
I wanted to ask you about, first of all, really enjoyed the film, congratulations. I wanted to ask you about the last sort of dream sequence just before he leaves the house for the last time, and your interpretation of it or intention of it.
The question is about the last dream sequence.
That sequence almost didn't make it into the movie. It was important for him to say goodbye to the place and the history of the place. But I wanted to do it in a way that didn't feel sort of, expected, I think, at that stage in the film. And I had this idea in my mind of the history of a place is inside of the things of you can see it in the things that are there, and you can almost play out the scenes of the past in the same spaces, and that the geography is the same. And I liked breaking it up into 3 scenes and sort of him moving throughout the space as he's experiencing this past sort of washing over him as he's leaving. Originally, it was there wasn't a goodbye, but my executive producer, James Seamus, felt like that was a cop-out, and then he told me to write it. And then I wrote it, and I just thought, like, there's no way we can do this without resources. So then again, I just felt like I don't really want to do it if it's going to look bad. So he kept saying, I think you need to trust more of the process, write the scene as you have envisioned it, and then trust the process of making it. I think because I come from a writing background, I had a deep fear of writing something that I couldn't execute. And he just really encouraged me to go for it and really try to do it. So then it ended up being what ended up being in the film, which is it's him sort of going through the history of this place in a very small way, but that felt more poetic than just looking at what was already there. I think that was I just wanted to feel like you're going through an old house or something, and then you can almost imagine what happened before you were there.
And we're almost out of time, but I think we can take one last quick question. Yes, in the corner.
Yeah, just following up on that, I really enjoyed the visual language and the way in which the memories of the place and connecting it to the train and to Glow sort of gave you a whole backstory without a backstory. And I was wondering what your process with your DP was in terms of coming up with that visual language. Even your gaffer, like a lot of the lighting seemed very specific.
The question is about visual language and working with your DP.
The process was very collaborative. I worked with Pat Scola, who shot this film. I saw a movie he had shot. It was called Pig, and it was really different from this movie, but it just felt so heartfelt, and that the cinematography was really servicing the story. It wasn't so much him imposing a style on it. So I knew that he was very versatile. And I wanted to work with somebody who was really putting the story first. He had also worked with children before, which I think was pretty important for me because I needed a cinematographer who was going to understand that we have very limited time. To do the setups, the camera, all of that has to really work around the children. And one of, we had a whole bunch of references, but Paolo Sorrentino's films was actually a reference for us. Crooklyn by Spike Lee. We were really inspired by Tyler Mitchell for the opening playground sequence, LaToya Ruby Frazier, Roy DeCarava. There were so many photographers also that, who had worked in Cabrini Green, and so those were a lot of our references. We wanted to make the place feel like you wanted to be there, especially inside of the unit, so the lighting had to feel very welcoming and warm. And then, of course, the relationship that they have with the place changes once the raid happens, so it shifts. But I think we need to, in subtle ways, really bring the audience into the space and not make it feel so oppressive, because the actual architecture of public housing is very oppressive. And the way it's been depicted before. So we really wanted to move away from that. I think in this film, compared to my last one, I really just became a bit more fearless in moving the camera and in the editing as well. Just taking some chances, really giving you a geography of a place, giving the place the sense of scope and wonder, because it was through the kids' perspective. So those are all of these things that we talked about in the lead up to shooting the film. But it really was, the film really came together to me visually once we had cast the kids, and then we were doing the tests with them, because it just felt really like, okay, this is coming together in a way that feels right. Because I think without the kids there, I don't know if I could fully imagine the movie.
Well, I think that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much for coming, and please give it up once more for Minhal Baig.
Thank you so much.